Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Tonight we'll talk about oil and money. All the Russian oil that India has been buying has helped keep inflation in check. But now it's also helping China. Reports say India is paying Russia in the Chinese currency, the yuan. We'll tell you why and why it's not good news. Also, a lot of diplomatic action today. India hosted the SCO summit virtually, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This was the first international appearance for President Vladimir Putin since the Wagner mutiny. Also in attendance were the President of China and the Prime Minister of Pakistan, among others. At this gathering, Prime Minister Modi called out state sponsors of terror, which is great. Perhaps it's also time to take a tough line with India's Western partners, those who harbour anti-India Khalistani terrorists. They set a consulate on fire in the US. They're planning anti-India rallies with hate slogans and threats. What are Western governments doing about this? Japan is releasing more than 1 million tons of radioactive water into the sea. Israel is striking a Palestinian refugee camp. And the Prime Ministers of Britain and Australia are at odds over a wicket in a cricket match. We'll tell you all about it. The headlines first. Drone attack shuts down a major airport in Moscow. Russia accuses Ukraine of launching 5 drones targeting its capital. Flights had to be diverted from the Vnukovo airport due to these strikes. This is one of Moscow's 3 international airports. Turkey and Egypt appoint ambassadors to restore diplomatic ties. Relations between the two countries were severed a decade ago. In 2013, Egypt expelled Turkey's ambassador, accusing Ankara of backing organizations that undermined Cairo. Will parents of children rioting in France be fined? French President Emmanuel Macron mulls the idea to stop vandalism. Of the nearly 4,000 people arrested, more than 1,200 are minors. Riots have been raging in France since a teen was killed by a policeman last week. NATO extends the term of its Secretary General again by 1 year. This is the 4th extension for Jens Stoltenberg. He will continue till October 2024 and he's been leading NATO since 2014. An Indian superstar, Shah Rukh Khan, has been injured while shooting in the US. He's undergone surgery. Reports say the actor is now back home and recuperating. Do you remember the rupee-ruble trade? It was all over the news last year. Russia and India would trade in local currencies. They would remove the US dollar from the equation. At least that was the plan. By May this year, the idea was dropped. It just wasn't practical enough. But now there is even worse news. Instead of local currencies, India could be paying in the Chinese currency, the yuan. Take a look at this report. It doesn't have official confirmation, but it does quote sources dealing closely with the trade. And what are they saying? Indian refiners are buying Russian oil with yuan. Indian oil became the first to do so in the month of June. At least 2 private refiners have also done it. We don't know which ones these are. We also don't know how much Russian oil they have bought. What we do know is this: it's not ideal. In March, the Indian government had warned precisely against this. Don't use the yuan for oil trade. And the reason is quite simple. China is trying to internationalize the yuan to challenge the US dollar. Why should India help China achieve that goal? Which is why there was emphasis on the rupee-ruble trade. But once that fell through, the yuan stepped in. How much money are we talking about here? Probably millions. Indian oil has used yuan for multiple cargoes. And the oil trade is only booming. In August last year, India imported around 730,000 barrels per day from Russia. In June this year, it hit 2 million barrels per day. Russia now makes up 42% of India's crude imports. Now, this has been both good and bad news. Good news because we got cheaper oil, and that's one reason why India's inflation is under control. The bad news is payments are getting tough. You can't use dollars or euros anymore. Russia has been booted out of all Western banking systems. Technically, India doesn't impose those sanctions. But Indian banks are wary because many of them have businesses abroad. So they're trying to keep their hands clean. And how are they doing that? By taking payments in other currencies. Reports say a lot of trade is happening in the UAE dirham. and since June in the Chinese Yuan. But why not the Indian rupee? That was the whole point of the rupee-ruble trade. So why not use the Indian currency? To understand that, we must look at the nature of Russia-India trade. It is booming, but it's mostly one way. India's trade deficit with Russia is $34 billion. And what does that mean? It means we are buying a lot more than we are selling to the Russians. Assume both countries use local currencies for this trade. Then what would happen? Russia would get a lot of Indian rupees, but they would not have much to buy with it. Reports say they would have a rupee surplus worth $40 billion, 40 billion every year. And that's a pile of unusable cash. Now I know what you're thinking. Why not convert that rupee into rubles and take it home? Well, that's the second problem. You see, the Indian rupee is only partially convertible. There are restrictions on converting large amounts. In fact, the yuan is the same. Even the Chinese currency is not fully convertible. But there is a key difference. China's trade deficit with Russia is just $3 billion. China's exports to Russia were up 19% at the beginning of this year. So Russia can use the yuan, but right now it cannot use the Indian rupee as much. Like I said, this is not an ideal situation. The Indian government doesn't like it. I'm sure the Indian banks and refiners don't like it either. So what's the way out? Well, one option is to make the rupee fully convertible. Several experts have been calling for that change, but such a decision could also backfire because fully convertible currencies cannot be controlled by the central bank. It's all about market forces then. And that means a lot of volatility in the currency market, which is never good news for developing nations. The second option is to make the rupee more desirable. And how do you do that? By closing the trade deficit, by exporting more things to Russia. And it's easier said than done. But in the last couple of months, we have made some progress. India's Commerce Ministry is already on the job. It has asked exporters to identify additional products that can be sold to Russia. Right now, most of the trade is engineering goods, medicines, chemicals. The plan is to expand that. February 2023 was a good month. India's exports to Russia rose by 25%. They reached the levels before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Engineering goods are leading the way. The export of those items jumped 11 times in April this year. The same month, an Indian trade delegation also landed in Moscow, and their focus was agricultural trade. India's agro exports to Russia are at $750 million. The target is to hit $3 billion in the next 3 years. Ambitious but necessary. And this is the best course of action for India. To cut down the deficit, to make the rupee more desirable, because depending on the yuan is not a long-term solution. A, we have political issues with China, and B, it would undercut the rupee's global ambitions. So the solution is simple, at least on paper: produce more and export more. But these things don't happen overnight. It will take years of policy nudges and investment. So it's the direction and the intent that matters. It's July already. We are into the second half of 2023, which means it's summit season. Most organizations will soon host their flagship gatherings like the NATO, the BRICS, the G20, the United Nations General Assembly. All of them will convene soon. But kicking off the summit season is the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India took over as SCO president last year. So New Delhi set the agenda and hosted the meetings. Today's summit was a virtual one. China's President Xi Jinping was in attendance, so was Vladimir Putin of Russia, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, and the Central Asian heads of state. 4 of them are members of the SCO. Turkmenistan is the only exception. Now you can imagine how complicated this video summit would have been. India has problems with China and Pakistan. Putin is fresh from a rebellion. So naturally, there was a lot to watch out for. Prime Minister Modi, being the host, kicked off the meeting. His focus was on countering terrorism. Modi called out states which used terror as a state policy. He did not take names, but I guess he didn't have to. Listen to what he said.
कुछ देश क्रॉस बॉर्डर टेररिज्म को अपनी नीतियों के इंस्ट्रूमेंट के रूप में इस्तेमाल करते हैं, आतंकवादियों को पनाह देते हैं। एससीओ को ऐसे देशों की आलोचना में कोई संकोच नहीं करना चाहिए।
Pakistan did get a chance to respond. Shehbaz Sharif said terrorism is a hydra-headed monster. He also said we must fight it with full vigor. Listen to this.
the hydra-headed monster of terrorism and extremism, whether committed by individuals, societies, or states, must be fought with full vigor and conviction. Any temptation to use it as a cudgel for diplomatic point scoring must be avoided under all circumstances.
I'm surprised he kept a straight face. That hydra-headed monster is Pakistan's own creation. Such grand statements cannot hide that reality. Anyway, next to speak was Russian President Vladimir Putin. He did talk about the recent rebellion by Wagner forces, but he was dismissive about it. He says Russia is more united than ever.
I would like to point out that Russia is confidently resisting and will continue to resist external pressure, sanctions and provocations. In the current environment, our country continues to develop steadily. The Russian people are consolidated as never before. Russian political circles and the whole of society clearly demonstrated their unity and elevated sense of responsibility for the fate of the fatherland.
That's an assurance from Putin. He basically wanted to say, I'm still in charge. China's President Xi Jinping also got his chance. He had a lot to say about the Belt and Road's 10-year anniversary. He also asked SCO members to chart independent foreign policies. In other words, don't pick the West. That's what China was trying to say. Beyond the statements, the SCO also got some work done. Iran was welcomed as the 9th member. Belarus was given the invitation to join next year. So the SCO is expanding further west. The leaders also signed the New Delhi Declaration. It's basically a joint statement. What does it say? 3 major things. 1, the SCO is not directed against other countries. There is scope for cooperation. 2, the SCO will avoid ideological or bloc-based approach to problems. And 3, the SCO will never militarize the outer space. But one problem still remains: dueling priorities. There is no consensus on what each member wants from the SCO, or for that matter, what the SCO is. You see, Beijing wants to create a Chinese club. It wants to use the SCO to dominate and control Eurasia, like a fast track for Xi's Belt and Road Initiative. But Russia wants status quo. It is using the SCO to keep Central Asia balanced. It doesn't want China to take over its backyard. Hence the campaign to give India membership, and next year Belarus. All of this means a good deal for Central Asia. Their location is a geographic boon. It can connect West Asia and Europe to Asia. It's got all the makings of a great transit hub. What they need, though, is investments. And at the SCO, there are multiple candidates, which brings us to India. What are India's expectations from this grouping, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Countering terror is a major objective, like in Afghanistan, where the SCO is a major stakeholder, or even in Pakistan, where regional groups can build pressure. India has put special emphasis on this. In fact, a separate joint statement on countering radicalism was also signed today. Clearly, it's priority for India. Secondly, the SCO could be a window to Eurasia. New Delhi has its own connectivity projects lined up, like the Chabahar port in Iran, or the INSTC, the International North-South Transport Corridor. It's an ambitious 7,000-kilometer project. It aims to connect Europe to India. Prime Minister Modi mentioned both these projects today, but once again, it's a question of dueling priorities. Will SCO members pick the BRI or the North-South Transport Corridor? Will China ever play a positive role in such projects? I think we know the answer, and looks like the Indian government does too. You see, the original plan was to host a 2-day in-person SCO summit. Instead, what we got was this: a 3-hour virtual one. It doesn't mean India is tuning out of the SCO. It means India is being realistic about what the potential is. For our next story, let's take a quick look at history. The year was 2002. Attack helicopters were hovering over Jenin. It's a city located in the West Bank. On the ground, a fierce battle was unfolding. Israeli soldiers battled Palestinian militants. Citizens were caught in the gunfire. When the smoke cleared, more than 50 people were dead. It was called the Battle of Jenin. It was Israel's biggest operation in the West Bank during the Second Intifada, or the Second Uprising. 2 decades later, it's an eerie deja vu for Jenin. Drones are striking the city's refugee camp. The streets are empty but filled with smoke. The noise of gunfire echoes through the night. On one side, there are Israeli soldiers. On the other, Palestinian militants. And caught in the middle, again, are ordinary residents.
There were strikes and bombs. It was like World War III, not even like the First World War, a Third World War. They are attacking unarmed people. They are using planes and rockets.
I came yesterday evening to take my sister to my home, but we were stuck. The military vehicles and bulldozers entered the area. This is a criminal enemy.
10 people have been killed, hundreds are injured, many are fleeing the camps. The residents of Jenin are calling it a black day, an attack by the so-called occupation. Israel, on the other hand, defends this as a military operation. It says the Jenin camp was a hub of terrorists.
There's a direct line between Islamic Jihad activity and Iran, funding capabilities, etc., etc. Talking about how long this will last, it could take hours, and it could also take days. We're not here to conquer or hold the ground. When it's finished, we'll be out of there.
The operation started on Monday morning. This was when Israel hit an apartment in this refugee camp. Then came the troops. The IDF, or the Israeli forces, even released a few pictures of the raid, including this one of an underground shaft. They say it was used to store explosive devices. Israel has long maintained that this refugee camp was a hub of militant groups, the likes of Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade.
The IDF launched a comprehensive action against terrorist strongholds in Jenin. In recent months, Jenin has become a safe haven for terrorists. From that safe haven, terrorists perpetrated savage attacks, murdering Israeli civilians. As I speak, our troops are battling the terrorists with unyielding resolve and fortitude, while doing everything to avoid civilian casualties.
Palestine, on the other hand, calls this a ruse, an attack on defenseless citizens. It called on other nations for help and protection.
We are again calling the international world to provide urgent international protection to our people and impose penalties against the occupation regime.
The Arab world has responded to this cry. Jordan, for one, slammed the Israeli aggression. So did Egypt, Turkey and Iran. The US has pleaded for closer cooperation. The United Nations has called for calm, but Israel is defending its actions. What explains this sudden attack on a refugee camp? The city has been a focal point of conflict. There have been raids in the past too, but they were never this violent. So many are calling it a distraction tactic. They say it's Prime Minister Netanyahu's way to make the world forget about protests at home. You see, Israel has been protesting over judicial reforms that he wants to bring in. And these are the biggest protests that the Jewish state has seen ever. These protests have entered their 26th week, but Israelis are not backing down. So are the Jenin raids just a distraction tactic? Prime Minister Netanyahu has been accused of this before, though, of using violence as a distraction. But where does this lead to? Are Israel and Palestine on the brink of another war? And this too has happened in the past multiple times, mostly in Gaza. But now it's playing out in Jenin. The city is part of the West Bank. It is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, or PA. They have administrative and security controls over this region. But it looks like the PA has lost control of the Jenin camp and of the situation. There's large-scale violence. It could lead to more conflicts, more militant groups, or more calls for a two-state solution. It's hard to say how this will end. Israel says the operation is almost over. It's only when the dust settles that the world will see the real impact of this raid. Tolerance and patience. They're great virtues to have, but they're not virtues to be exploited. Someone should tell that to the West, especially to the US, Canada and the UK, because the Khalistanis have struck again. Their target? The Indian Consulate in San Francisco. This video shows the building on fire. The local fire brigade was deployed to bring it under control. Thankfully, there was no major damage. All the diplomats are also safe. The US State Department has condemned the arson. Their spokesperson says violence against diplomats or their facilities is a criminal offense. But what are they doing about it? The same consulate was attacked in March this year. Khalistanis broke through barricades and gates. They installed Khalistani flags on the building. Washington condemned that incident as well. But months later, the threat remains and the actions are repeated. It was a security breach in March. It's arson today. I wonder what's next. How long can Indian diplomats live in fear? How many more Indian consulates have to be attacked for the Western governments to actually do something? The fact is, the US government is dragging its feet. They say they're concerned, but in reality, they aren't doing much. Sunday's incident seems to have been a revenge attack. Revenge for what? The killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He was a Khalistani based in Canada. The Indian government had declared him a terrorist. On the 19th of June, he was gunned down in Vancouver. We don't know who the attackers were or what their motive was. But clearly it has enraged Khalistanis. Nijjar was the chief of the Khalistani Tiger Force. He also worked with Sikhs for Justice. So these organizations are out with a vengeance. The consulate attack could have been one tactic. Another one is planned for the 8th of July. A so-called Khalistan Freedom Rally. This is being organized in the US, in Canada and in Australia. Look at their posters. They say kill India. They also display the name and picture of the top Indian diplomats in those countries. This is the American poster. Down below, you can see Taranjit Singh Sindhu. He's India's ambassador to the United States of America. These diplomats have been labeled killers of Hardeep Nijjar. India has summoned the Canadian envoy in response. It has also lodged a diplomatic protest. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar once again had a warning for these countries. He said Khalistani thought is not good for relations. Listen to this.
We have requested our partner countries like Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom and Australia not to give space to the Khalistanis. This will affect our relations.
Now, Canada is clearly the hotspot. The biggest rally will also probably be in Canada. So what is their government doing about this? The foreign minister says the posters are unacceptable. She also said the safety of Indian diplomats will be guaranteed. So very similar to the US statement. But this problem isn't just about security, is it? Yes, the urgent need is security, but the larger problem is the politics. The likes of Canada see Khalistanis as a security threat to Indian diplomats or to Indian facilities. They don't think it's a threat to themselves or to the Indian Republic. And that's the problem here. You know how Pakistan kept talking about good terrorists? Well, this is no different. Canada's government thinks Khalistanis are a vote bank, hence the reluctance to crack down. India has handled this issue with patience and tolerance so far, but how much longer? Indians living abroad are now feeling unsafe. Indian diplomats are being called killers. So New Delhi must draw the red line somewhere because other governments have. The US invaded other countries to capture wanted terrorists. In the process, they killed thousands of innocents. Why not show the same urgency against terrorists targeting India? Well, because of politics. This problem will not disappear just by beefing up security or giving more bodyguards to Indian diplomats. That should be done, yes, but that alone is not enough. You need to target the root of Khalistani separatism and terrorism. You need a broad crackdown to choke this movement, their funding, their groups. But knowing the West, it's not happening soon. For our next story, let's turn our attention to Japan. It faces the ire of the world and its people alike. I'll tell you why, but first a quick flashback. We're going back to the year 2011. That's when Japan witnessed an earthquake. You may remember it. It was the strongest one in Japan's recorded history. It resulted in a tsunami, killed over 18,000 people along its northeast coast, rendered more than 450,000 people homeless, and caused the destruction of the Fukushima Daiichi plant. It's a nuclear power plant in Japan's Fukushima. The tsunami knocked out its power supply. There was no electricity. It led to meltdowns in nuclear reactors. It was the world's worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl in 1986. Almost 12 years have passed since. Radiation levels in the atmosphere have dropped. Damaged reactor buildings have been treated and robots have been put to work to identify melted fuels in basements. But Japan is still battling the disaster's legacy. I'm talking about water. 1.3 million tons of it. Enough to fill 500 Olympic-sized pools. It was used to cool down the damaged reactors. Now it has accumulated in the plant. It fills 1,000 tanks in the complex. And space is running out. So Japan wants to release this water into the sea, but this is extremely controversial because this isn't your everyday all-natural water. This is radioactive wastewater. It has been treated, sure, but it still contains tritium. That's a radioactive material. It's difficult to separate from water, but Japan wants to release it regardless. Gradually dump it into the sea over the span of a few decades. And to the world, this is concerning. The island nation says this water is safe, but many strongly disagree, especially China. China has called for the suspension of this plan. Japan has repeatedly tried to change China's mind about it, to explain its stance to Beijing, but China, being China, has ignored the offers for a conversation.
Who will monitor the discharge that has so much uncertainty for so long? How to monitor it? How to ensure the credibility of monitoring? There is no tangible conclusion to any of these questions. Our request is simple, that is, the Japanese side calls off the ocean discharge plan, earnestly consults with the international community, and jointly explores a scientific, safe, and transparent way to deal with the issue that is acceptable to all parties.
South Korea is worried too. Guess what they're doing about it? Hoarding excessive amounts of sea salt. There has been a sudden surge in demand and it has risen prices of salt by 27% in just 2 months. People worry that radioactive materials may contaminate the salt or that salt supply from Japan may reduce, which could increase its price further. So South Koreans are planning ahead and in doing so, they're panic buying.
I recently bought 5 kilograms of salt. As a mother raising 2 children, I couldn't just sit back and do nothing because I wanted to feed them safely. Once you throw this into the ocean, it becomes irreversible. If problems arise later on, it will be a belated regret.
And this anger extends to the Pacific Islands. They're still dealing with the legacy of nuclear weapons testing. This was done by the US, the UK and France in the 1940s. So the Pacific Islands fear additional water contamination and they oppose Japan's plan too.
Throwing radioactive water waste in the Pacific Ocean will harm not only the fishes in the ocean, but as well as the people who will be exposed to the radioactive material. And this means that our exposure to radioactive oceans will be continuous and will be passed on to the next generation of young people who will be relying on the oceans for their livelihood.
But more than a dampened relationship with neighboring countries, Japan is facing fierce anger within its boundaries. The local fishing communities say the plan will destroy their livelihoods. It's something they've had to rebuild over a decade. They believe consumers will shun their catch, prices will skyrocket, and fishers will go hungry.
Those who say nuclear contaminated water is safe, none of them actually work in the fishery business or know what is going on. Those of us in the aquaculture industry all think it's unsafe. Even before the dumping of the nuclear contaminated water, I was affected by it. Everything collapsed in my life.
What I'm thinking now is you shouldn't eat any fish at all. Let's see what meat and other alternatives are available.
But even so, Japan has one ally, not a country, not its people, but a UN watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency. This agency says there's nothing wrong with Tokyo's plan to release wastewater. Listen to this.
The plan, as it has been proposed and devised, is in conformity with the agreed international standards. And its application, if the government decides to proceed with it, would have negligible impact on the environment, meaning the water, fish, and sediment.
Negligible impact on the environment. And we can imagine how happy this would have made Japan because they've been trying their best to make the world believe it.
Japan will continue to provide explanations to the Japanese people and to the international community in a sincere manner, based on scientific evidence and with a high level of transparency.
So Japan is planning to go ahead with the water release. Even though no one seems to be buying their explanation, countries like China refuse to believe the UN watchdog, much like they don't believe Japan. But the island nation is relentless. It will release a final plan soon after its approval from the regulator, and that should come as early as this week. And after that, it's all hands on deck. All while many wonder if they will soon witness three-eyed fish or a Godzilla origin story. Yesterday, we told you about an upcoming visit to China. US Treasury Chief Janet Yellen is going to Beijing to manage the relationship and calm down tensions. But today, we can tell you that ties are unraveling further. This story is about the US-China Chip War. Semiconductors or chips are the oil of the 21st century, and whoever controls them will control the world. So it's no surprise that these countries are battling over chips. And it's been on for a while. America drew the first blood. It restricted chip exports to China, and now Beijing has struck back. Today, China imposed curbs on some raw materials. We are talking about the likes of gallium and germanium. These are two rare elements. They're essential in manufacturing semiconductors, and China is curbing their export. So going forward, exporters will have to take special permission from the state to ship them out.
What I want to say is that China has always been committed to maintaining the security and stability of the global production and supply chain, and has always implemented fair, reasonable and non-discriminatory export control measures, and it does not target any specific country.
That was the Chinese Foreign Ministry. They say the ban is not to target a particular country, but no one's buying that. The target of this ban is quite clear, as is China's strategy. You see, gallium and germanium are crucial raw materials. They're used in everything from chips to solar panels, and they're on Europe's list of critical raw materials, meaning they're essential for Europe's economy. And China is the world's largest producer of gallium. It is also a leading germanium producer. And now Beijing is pulling the strings. What does this mean for the chip industry? And this is a truly global industry, because remember, chips are not produced in any one country. This is a truly global supply chain designed in the US, manufactured in East Asia and assembled in China. The machines come from the Netherlands. So US, Europe, Asia and China, everyone gets a slice of the action. This also makes it a chaotic supply chain. Last week, the Netherlands restricted exports of some semiconductor equipment. It angered China. This week, China has curbed exports. And now the West is worried. Basically, everyone is relying on everyone else, and the constant curbs are not helping anyone. So where does this leave the chip industry? I come back to the question. Until now, Washington has been leading this race. It is the chip design hub, and that gives America an edge. But China has now played its ultimate trump card: critical raw materials, gallium and germanium. The US depends on China for these. In 2021, America imported over 50% of these two raw materials from China. So Beijing may use this as a bargaining chip during Yellen's visit, maybe for some concessions. Also remember, the Americans have some alternatives. There are other producers like the UK, Germany and Belgium, which brings us to another question. Will there be more curbs? Well, most likely yes. Both sides are escalating this conflict, and they know that curbs are a double-edged sword. China may dominate the rare earths market, it may have all the raw materials, but curbing exports will affect its market dominance. So how long can they play this game? From the looks of it, it has just begun. They say beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, but what happens when the beholder doesn't care for beauty? When they only care about control? Well, you end up with a situation plaguing Afghanistan. The Taliban have imposed yet another diktat, another way to restrict women. They've banned hair and beauty salons. This, among other things, was one of the very few remaining means of employment for Afghan women. And a month from now, this too will stop. Here's a report.
The Taliban are up to their old tricks again, finding new ways to make the lives of Afghan women more miserable. The latest in their gender side is the banning of beauty salons. It started last week. The Taliban sent out a text message telling hair and beauty salons that they were on the clock. These businesses have to wind up by the end of the month. Anyone found operating their salons beyond the deadline will suffer dire consequences. Now the question is, why? Well, the Taliban say they'll tell us, eventually, once the salons have all shut. So until then, we can't do much but speculate. We should spend this time asking the big picture questions. First, what does this mean for Afghan women? Well, that's another employment avenue out of the window. And it's the end of women-only workspaces for them. Salons reportedly served as a sort of safe haven for Afghan women. It was a place where they could gather without men present. A place free from male chaperones and guardians. That's gone now. The next question we should ask is why this sudden return to form by the Taliban? You see, the Taliban have done this before. During their last stint in power back in the late 1990s, salons were forced to shut down then as well. But when the Taliban took over Afghanistan again in 2021, they had promised to do things differently. They promised the world that this was a new, relatively moderate Taliban. A Taliban 2.0, if you will. That was all rubbish, of course, but the world bought it. And it's the Afghans, especially the women, who are paying the price. Are the Taliban doing this because they feel the global scrutiny shifting away? Have they realized that no one is going to lift a finger to stop them? They've been committing crimes against women ever since they took control in 2021. The Taliban have stopped women from getting an education beyond the 6th grade. They have imposed strict dress codes and chaperone laws. And they keep restricting women's participation in the workforce. The UN has called this systematic repression gender apartheid.
Grave, systematic and institutionalized discrimination against women and girls as is at the heart of Taliban ideology and rule, which also gives rise to concerns that they may be responsible for gender apartheid, a serious human rights violation which, although not yet explicitly an international crime, requires further study. We also draw to the Council's attention our deep concern that these serious deprivations of women and girls' fundamental human rights and the harsh enforcement by the de facto authorities of their restrictive measures may constitute the crime against humanity of gender persecution.
The UN wants to study the Taliban's gender apartheid and see if it can be called an international crime. It already calls the Taliban's rule a crime against humanity. And as countries continue to turn a blind eye, things will only get worse for Afghan women. After this latest salon ban, women can now only work as doctors and nurses. And who knows how long that will last. Unless the world starts putting some real pressure on the warlords in Kabul, they will continue to assault the dignity of the women in Afghanistan.
And now let's talk cricket. The Ashes series is on and two unlikely figures have stepped up to the crease. We're talking about the Prime Ministers of the UK and Australia, Rishi Sunak and Anthony Albanese. They've decided to wade into a controversy. They're making statements on a cricket match, weighing in on a controversial dismissal. This relates to the second test match. Let me quickly fill you in. The 73rd Ashes series between Australia and England is taking place as we speak. It is being played in England and the home side have lost the first two matches. Now, one incident from the second test has caused tempers to flare. The dismissal of England wicketkeeper Johnny Bairstow. While facing a ball, he seemed to have forgotten that the game was still in play and he walked away from his crease. Australian wicketkeeper Alex Carey stumped him. And this was alleged out. But England says the dismissal went against the spirit of the game.
Taking the whole situation in consideration, I think the first thing needs to be said, it is out, and then would have had to have a real think around the spirit of the game and would I want to potentially win a game with something like that happening, and it would be no.
The captain, Ben Stokes, the coach, Brendan McCullum, everyone was incensed. The crowd at Lord's Cricket Ground started chanting, "Same old Aussies, always cheating."
Shame! Shame! Cheating! Shame old Aussies, always cheating!
The next day, English tabloids went to town crying foul play. And now the players are a bit riled up. Bairstow obviously was not pleased with the way he got out. His expression while shaking hands says it all. And the English side want to use this to their advantage. They believe their anger will fuel a fight back. Although they insist there are no hard feelings.
It seems like every Ashes has some drama to it. Even one-sided Ashes in the past things get stoked up halfway through a series. So I think if anything, it just feels like it's kind of, you've got two old rivals who are playing against each other, and is it going to change anything? I don't think so. I don't think it'll change anything for us. I think we're still amicable.
But everyone wants to add their 2 cents. Pundits and paper publishers keep stoking the fire. Even the police in Australia's Victoria had a few words for Bairstow. So, of course, how could the politicians be far behind? Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was the opener. He sent out a spokesperson with a message. It said the British Prime Minister agreed with Captain Ben Stokes that he wouldn't want to win a game the way the Australians did. Of course, Prime Minister Albanese was not going to take that lying down. He shot back with his tweet. So does that mean the rivalry has transcended the pitch and entered the political arena? Well, not this time, not yet anyway. The Ashes series is an epic rivalry and it has seen far more tension than this. Like in 1932-33, that's when it really did spark a diplomatic row. England's infamous bodyline tactics led to a heated exchange. On one side was the Australian Cricket Board, on the other, England's Marylebone Cricket Club. The then governor of South Australia was in England when this happened. He expressed concern. He spoke to the British Secretary of State for Dominion Affairs. The fallout was seen in Australia. Their Prime Minister had a crisis meeting to discuss the trade ramifications. All this over the Ashes, over a cricket match. Now, for those in the Indian subcontinent, this may not come as a surprise. Cricket is like a religion in these parts. It evokes strong passions, especially an India-Pakistan match. It's the most watched televised event in history. And whether we like it or not, it tends to become a lot more than sport. When relations go downhill, the first casualty is cricket. Leaders wane, people speak out. Compared to this, we say the Ashes is just another series. Also, Sunak's spokesperson says he does not view cricket as a core diplomatic issue, which is probably a good call. Our last story today is about a cage fight between 2 billionaires, Twitter owner Elon Musk and Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg. We told you about this last week. The date for the physical fight is still undecided, but in another arena, they're already fighting. Headlines all over the world are talking about Threads. They're calling it the Twitter killer. Threads is a new app by Meta. It's being launched this week to rival Twitter. And Twitter has remained stubbornly irreplaceable thus far, but it faces its fair share of challenges now. So what will become of this face-off? Here's a report.
This is Twitter, a social media company owned by tech billionaire Elon Musk. It's been around since 2006 and has come to mean different things to different people. To some, it's a platform for free speech. To others, it's a pool of hearty controversies. But to Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, Twitter is his Achilles heel. He has long wanted to dislodge the app. He has wanted to provide another central place for online conversation. But he hasn't been able to. Even so, this hasn't stopped him. Now, Meta has teased a new app, and it is singularly aimed at beating Twitter. So much so that it's being called the Twitter killer. Its real name is Threads, and it's connected to Instagram, the social media app also owned by Meta. It is set to be launched this Thursday. It'll function a lot like Twitter. Threads will emphasize on public conversations. It's obvious that tech rivals would launch competing apps, which possess similar qualities and have a showdown in the app stores on our smart devices. But something is worth noting here. Zuckerberg seems to be striking Twitter when it's down. Elon Musk bought Twitter last year. Since then, Twitter's value has plummeted by 2/3. Musk has been playing around with the app's algorithm. Now, Twitter has thrown out content moderation policies, overhauled the verification process. Most recently, it imposed limits in the number of tweets one can read. This effectively made the app unusable after a point, and users became frustrated. So Twitter is clearly facing fresh turbulence, and this has given Zuckerberg an opening to throw his Zucker punch. Will it work? Experts certainly think so.
I think Threads is going to pose a huge threat to Twitter because it's coming from the Meta and Instagram family of apps. Instagram has 2 billion users compared to around 250 million of Twitter, so it's about 10 times bigger already. So if only 1 in 10 Instagram users tries using Threads, it's overtaken Twitter in the blink of an eye.
After all, Meta is the most credible competitor to Twitter. It has deep pockets and an audience of more than 3 billion people who use Facebook, Instagram, or its other apps. But in this tech cage fight, does Twitter stand a chance? It's hard to say. There is certainly potential to recover. Although first, Twitter will have to rebuild what it lost.
I think what it needs to do is start rebuilding what it had, because what it does have, that it still has, is its name and its cachet, especially in certain circles, media, technology. Twitter is still used. So build back more of what it had, and it could potentially have a future ahead.
But considering Elon Musk's self-destructive tendencies, it's tough to imagine how fast Twitter will improve. After all, in Musk's eyes, Twitter is improving. One impulsive decision at a time. The thing is, up till now, Twitter had free rein. It had a monopoly, so it could afford to be callous. But now it faces its biggest threat ever. It'll have to indulge in much more than chaos to attract its disengaged users.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Peru's most active volcano, Ubinas, has reported heavy activity. It shook the region and sent a column of toxic gas into the air. They're set to declare a state of emergency. In Japan, parts of a sea turned an ominous shade of red. This was after a leak at a local beer factory. The supermoon lit up the skies last night. We have images from Latin America where the moon appeared brighter and larger than usual. And finally, what makes the 4th of July significant? It is America's Independence Day. In 1776, the US gained independence from Britain. And speaking of independence, the US shares this day with its colony, the Philippines, which ironically gained freedom from the United States in the year 1946. After 48 years of colonization. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
48 years of American sovereignty, the men and women of the Philippines received their independence. Reduced to poverty after the Japanese occupation, Manuel Roxas, newly elected office, as a new era of prosperity dawns for the gallant people of the Philippines.